Some wondering about the Book of Abraham might ask how likely it would have been for ancient Egyptians to have known anything about the biblical figure Abraham. In fact, evidence survives today indicating that stories about Abraham were known to the ancient Egyptians as early as the time of the composition of the Joseph Smith Papyri. The earliest documented appearance of the biblical story of Abraham in ancient Egypt dates to the 3rd century BC. It was at this time when the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek in the Egyptian city of Alexandria. This translation is commonly called the Septuagint. In addition to the biblical text, extra biblical stories about Abraham circulated in Egypt during this time. For example, during the reign of Ptolemy I, Hecataeus of Abdera traveled to Thebes and learned stories about Abraham from Egyptian priests. He wrote these stories in a book called On Abraham and the Egyptians. This work is now unfortunately lost, but Clement of Alexandria, a 2nd century AD Egyptian Christian, quoted a short passage from it in which the worship of idols is condemned. The writer Epolomus, who lived under Egyptian rule in Palestine in the 2nd century BC, recounts how Abraham lived in Heliopolis and taught astronomy and other sciences to the Egyptian priests. In connection with Abraham, Epolemos seems to think that the Egyptians descended from Canaan. In the 1st century BC, the Egyptian Jew Artapanus wrote an account of Abraham teaching astronomy to the Egyptian pharaoh. Philo, a 1st century AD Egyptian Jew, claimed that Abraham studied astronomy, the motion of the stars, meteorology, and mathematics, and used his reasoning on these subjects to understand God. The Testament of Abraham describes Abraham's tour of the next life before he dies. Scholars think that this work was written by an Egyptian Jew around the 1st century AD. It is notable for its reinterpretation of the Egyptian judgment scene in a Jewish fashion. This text was read liturgically the Sunday before Christmas during the Egyptian month of Kohiak. A fragmentary text from Egypt about Abraham describes how the king, the word used is Pharaoh, tries to sacrifice Abraham, but Abraham is delivered by an angel of the Lord. Abraham later teaches the members of the royal court about the true God using astronomy. An additional significant body of evidence for the Egyptian view of Abraham comes from a collection of texts commonly called the Greek Magical Papyri or the Theban Magical Library. This corpus of texts from the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes preserves a variety of magical spells and formulae, hymns, and rituals. The extant texts are mainly from the 2nd century BC to the 5th century AD. Significantly, numerous biblical names and figures are used in these texts alongside native Egyptian and Greek names and figures. The name for this common ancient phenomenon is syncretism, where elements of different religions or traditions were harmonized together into a new synthetic religious paradigm. In some important ways, the religion practiced by the Egyptians during the time of the Joseph Smith Papyri was a highly syncretic one. Why were biblical figures syncretized with Egyptian religious or magical practice? We cannot know entirely for sure, but one very plausible reason is that the Israelite religious beliefs and stories had a number of things to offer the Egyptians. Israelite religion could offer the Egyptians stories associated with sanctity and sacred space, amulets, angels, a personal relationship with deity, and a God who acted in history. Whatever the exact reason might be, a non-comprehensive list of non-divine names in these texts include Abimelech, Abraham, Adam, Ammon, Aziel, Dardanos, David, Emmanuel, Gabriel, Gomorrah, Isaac, Israel, Jacob, Jeremiah, Jerusalem, Judah, Lot, Lot's wife, Michael, Moses, Solomon, and even Osiris Michael. Names for the Israelite deity include Adonai, Adonai Sabaoth, as well as just Sabaoth, which is more common, Elohim, El, God of the Hebrews, Yahweh, the abbreviated version of Jehovah, which was often employed by Jews in Egypt, and Blessed Lord God of Abraham, along with many variations and combinations of these names and titles that undoubtedly refer to the Hebrew God, such as he who drew back the Jordan River, or referencing the God who drove the winds at the Red Sea and met someone at the foot of the holy mount to reveal his great name. Abraham and Moses were two popular figures used by these Egyptian priests in their magical practices. They were so popular, in fact, that an early Egyptian Christian writer named Origen even registered his outrage that his pagan neighbors were invoking the God of Abraham without properly knowing who Abraham really was. From the evidence of the Greek magical papyri, we can conclude that a group of priests from Thebes possessed, read, understood, and employed biblical and extra-biblical texts, most especially texts about Abraham and Moses. This evidence, along with other evidence for a knowledge of Abraham circulating in ancient Egypt, bolsters confidence in the Book of Abraham's authenticity by providing it a plausible ancient Egyptian historical and literary context.